Hi, everyone. So, today we are going to be talking about the top three things you need to know before you file your VAWA application. This is so important that as you're going through the VAWA process, thinking about VAWA, thinking about what you need, and all those things, that you know exactly what to expect, because this is a long process. Okay, there are things you need to know before you even file, to make sure that you are setting yourself up for success. So, we're going to be talking about those three things today. I am U.S. immigration attorney Lilian Chukuwrah, and I help my clients get green cards and citizenships for themselves and their families using the U.S. immigration law system. So, the first thing that you need to think about is if you meet the requirements for VAWA. Okay, if you meet the requirements for VAWA, have you experienced battery or extreme cruelty in your relationship? Okay, battery is basically physical violence. Have you experienced physical violence in your relationship? So, if you have experienced physical violence and you have been married to a US citizen, and during that marriage, your US citizen spouse abused you physically, then you would qualify for VAWA, right? Now, that is a simple uh, requirement, right? You know what physical abuse looks like. Everyone knows that. But what about extreme cruelty? Because it's one of two things. It's either you had the battery or extreme cruelty. And this is where people really get hung up because they're not sure what's the definition of extreme cruelty. Is it just that we had arguments, right, that other couples have? Does it have to be more than that? And typically it has to be more than that. But it's also more than that based on your particular situation, right? Based on your particular relationship. In some situations, arguments may seem like, if you break it down, then you're just like, oh, we argue once in a while. That may seem not to reach the level of extreme cruelty. However, when you actually break it down to what were those arguments about? What were the words that were said in those arguments? What were the after effects of those arguments, right? That's where you start really crafting that extreme cruelty part of things. So when people come to me and they say, well, it's just, sometimes he yells. Okay, what does he yell about? Sometimes she doesn't come home. Okay, there has to be something more. So we have to, as part of my job, is to ask follow-up questions to get more information, to basically assess whether I believe it reaches a level of extreme cruelty, because that's the level USCIS is going to be looking for. Okay, it's not just simple arguments. All right. It's not just arguments about who's doing the dishes, right? It's not just those things. It's more than that. So you want to make sure that as you're thinking about your particular situation, that you are not just thinking that, just because you're married to a US citizen and you heard an argument, that is enough. There's more to it. And you want to work with a lawyer or a psychologist to kind of get more information on and explore the different things that happened in that relationship. Because you, as you're thinking about the abuse that you have been through, you may not see certain things as abuse. Okay, there's certain things that may have happened in your relationship that is just normal to you because it's happened since the day you met your spouse, and for you it's normal. However, it's not just about you, right? Objectively, if someone else outside of your relationship that has not been with your partner for that long sees that behavior, what would they think of it? Okay. So remember, USCIS officers are not in your home. They are now part of your day-to-day lives. They are looking at what you're giving them, and they are looking at it from a lens of, does this reach extreme cruelty? Is this so egregious that we're going to see this as extreme cruelty? Approve this person's VAWA, get them on the path of citizen of a green card, then citizenship. Is this enough? And that's what you want to always think about, is how would someone else perceive this? And make sure that when you are speaking with a lawyer, when you are doing a psychological evaluation, that you are talking about every single thing, right? As much as you can, keeping in mind that this is going to be the most difficult part of your whole process, is talking about this, right? Talking about the abuse that you've been through. I've had people, they do their psychological evaluation, and we have to follow up with them. The psychologist has to follow up with them to make sure they are okay, because it is traumatic, right? Having to talk about the abuse, relive the whole thing, is going to be traumatic. So just be prepared that, you may not want to talk about it, but if you want to qualify for VAWA, if you want to get yourself on a path to a green card without your U.S. citizen spouse's involvement, you have to talk about it. Okay? You have to make it clear to USCIS that this is not normal, right? It's not just normal everyday couple arguments where there's no abuse. This is something that is way beyond that. So that's one thing I wanted to cover, is you have to prove either physical abuse, battery, or extreme cruelty. And I wanted to use that specific language because that is what USCIS is going to be looking for. And that's the language they want you to prove, right? That's what the law says, extreme cruelty, not just arguments, okay? So we want to make sure that we're using that, and that is the bar we're trying to meet at all times. The next thing you need to know is that you still have to prove the relationship. Okay? You have to prove that your marriage is real. You have to prove that you two lived together. Because if you cannot prove that you lived together, if you cannot prove that you entered the marriage in good faith, USCIS is going to deny your VAWA. Okay, so VAWA is not just the abuse. The abuse is the thing that gets you into the conversation of VAWA. But if you never lived with your spouse, even for a day, right? If that never happened, you cannot file a VAWA application. If you cannot prove that your relationship was real, you will not be able to get this approved. So it's really important that as you're going through and thinking about filing for VAWA or getting out of the relationship, that you are saving things from the relationship. Because I know people that have destroyed pictures, threw them away because they just don't want any reminders of their ex, right? They don't want any of that in their new path forward. However, those things matter to USCIS, okay? Those things matter. So you want to, if you have to give it to somebody, right? If you have to give it to someone to hold for you, where it's not in your space. You don't have to see it every day, but you're able to get to it when you are ready to file your VAWA application, so that you have that documentation of your good faith marriage. All right. So you want to make sure that you're holding on to documents showing that you live together. If you had a joint bank account, if you had a lease together, just whatever you can get to show that relationship, you want to keep. Okay. Do not get rid of things that could potentially be helpful in your VAWA case. So before you even file, Think about your life together. Think about what documents do you have? Text messages. Do not delete those. Facebook messages, WhatsApp messages, all those things, do not delete them. If they sent you voice notes threatening your life, don't delete it. Send it to a friend. Save it to the cloud. Something where you can still get access to it. Because guess what we'll do with those voice notes? We download it, we get it transcribed, and we send it to USCIS so that they can see this is the level of abuse. This is the level of physical abuse, verbal, psychological, financial. There's so many types of abuse, and you want to document it. You want to document that you live together. So you want to save as much of your documentation as possible and figure out a way to not have it in your space if that's going to be a trigger for you. Okay, maybe open a Google Docs, completely different email, Google Docs, upload everything there, and just know that it's not in your everyday Google Docs pictures and all of those things. Okay, so those are things you can do on the front end to make sure that you do not get to a point where USCIS is asking you for proof of your relationship and you're like, well, I don't have any because I threw everything away and I'm not able to get additional copies. Okay, so make sure that you're saving those things because you have to prove the marriage is real and that you two lived together. If you're getting value out of this video so far, please do me a favor and hit the like button just so I know that you are enjoying this. The last thing I wanted to cover is how a divorce can affect the process. All right. So if you file for divorce and your divorce becomes final before you get around to filing your VAWA application, just know you have to file your VAWA application within 2 years. Okay. You cannot file it more than 2 years after that divorce becomes final. So again, this is important because sometimes people don't even think about VAWA as an option. Okay. They don't even think about it. But if that becomes an option, you want to also know that you can file even if you're divorced, as long as it's still within 2 years of that divorce. If it's past 2 years, there may be a way to, ask USCIS to still process the application, but it's very difficult to get those approved. So if you're within that 2 years, you can still apply for VAWA. The divorce will not stop you from applying for VAWA if you file within those 2 years. If your VAWA application is already pending and you get a divorce, it's not going to affect your application. Okay, it's really important that you know that. If you get a divorce while your VAWA application is pending, it will not affect your application. Now, if you get an annulment, right? If you get an annulment while your VAWA application is pending, then that's a problem, right? That can be a problem because an annulment basically says this marriage never happened, right? A divorce says the marriage happened, but we ended it. An annulment says, well, when the marriage happened, it shouldn't have happened in the first place. So let's just pretend as if it never happened. Right? That's what an annulment does. So you want to make sure that if you are going to file for divorce, that you are filing for divorce. Okay? Not an annulment. Because I've had previously a client's ex try to do that to her by filing an annulment, even though they didn't meet the requirements for an annulment, right? Because there was no fraud, there was nothing about the marriage that wasn't legal or valid. So the marriage was valid, and he was just trying to stick it to her and file an annulment. So it's really, really important that you do not fall into that trap and pay attention to what your ex is filing as well, because if they file an annulment, you want to fight that, right? You want to make sure that that is not the basis that the marriage ended, that it is a divorce. Okay. All right. So those are the three things that I wanted to cover. You have to prove battery, physical abuse, or extreme cruelty, which can be other types of abuse. For example, psychological, verbal, financial, sexual, um, all everything else other than physical violence is under extreme cruelty, and you need to make sure that it rises to the level of extreme cruelty. It is not just a one-off argument. What about that one-off argument made it extremely cruel? All right, so you want to really think about that. You want to make sure that you have documentation of good faith marriage and of you two living together. If you do not want those documentation in your space, create a separate Google Docs, upload it there, get it out of your day-to-day life, but do not destroy it, because you want access to that when you are filing your application, because you still have to prove that your marriage was real and that you lived together. If you get a divorce, that is fine. But if you haven't filed your VAWA application yet, make sure that you are filing the VAWA application within 2 years of that divorce, or you will be out of the VAWA process. Okay. If you already have your VAWA process pending and you file for divorce, just make sure you are filing for divorce and not an annulment, and that will not affect your VAWA application, because you are allowed to leave your abuser. Okay, you are allowed to leave your abuser even if your VAWA application is pending. If you want a consultation with me where we look at your situation and figure out what the best options are for you, you can do that one of two ways. You can go to my website, lilylegal.com, or you can call my office at 508 443 1788.